Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I'm your host, Jaime, CMO at World Football Summit. Ferran Prieto, co-founder of Everest Talent Management, is our excellent guest today. Ferran helps build strategic partnerships between athletes and organizations, and he works with sports legends like Pau Gasol, Juan Mata, and Cesar Azpilicueta. This conversation was so much fun. I could have gone for hours asking questions, and I think you will get a ton of value from it. We discussed how the investment strategy has strong ties to the athlete's personal brand, the differences in the investment culture among North American and European athletes. We talk about the dynamics of athletes investing in football clubs, the MLS, women's football, esports, so much more. We talk at great length about athletes who are using their platforms to create a positive change in society as well. Pau Gasol, Juan Mata, or Marcus Rashford are just some of the examples that we talk about. We also discuss trends to look out for. But remember, guys, this episode does not aim to provide any form of financial advice. It is for entertainment purposes only. Again, I hope you enjoy the interview as much as I did. Finally, remember, World Football Summit Europe will travel back to Sevilla on September 20th and 21st. Will you? We have a wide selection of tickets available for those who want to help shape the future of football. Head over to www.worldfootballsummit.com. Again, that's www.worldfootballsummit.com and buy your ticket right now. And with that, enjoy this sports business masterclass with Ferran Prieto from Everest Talent Management. Well, Ferran, thank you so much for joining us at the World Football Summit podcast.
My pleasure.
It is a pleasure to have you. I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
So, Ferran, before we go into some of the topics we're going to cover today in the conversation, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself and I guess also not only provide a brief background on yourself, but I'm curious, why is it that you do what you do?
So, well, interesting question to start. I would say, well, first I was born and raised in Barcelona. I actually studied industrial engineering and worked in the automotive industry before and after business school. But then I started getting into, entrepreneurship and startups and stuff like that. So I worked in venture capital, started a venture capital fund within GM, ran a couple of startups for the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, Dan Gilbert, who's a businessman in Detroit. And then those experiences took me to work with Pau Gasol. And the reason, what I found interesting is he realized that he had an amazing platform, an amazing reach in terms of number of people that followed him, and amazing access in terms of the things that he had access to, business opportunities, business leaders, politicians, movers and shakers, if you will, right? But he didn't have the business background to know what to do with that and actually execute on it. And I found that very, very interesting. So that's where I started, doing with Pau. Kind of became his manager or, CEO of his companies. And then as I started working with him, I realized that other athletes had similar, ambitions. Like they realized that, the professional sports is not going to last forever. They're going to have at least the second half of their life, but they're not going to be able to compete, but they still have, things that they want to do and goals that they want to accomplish. But they don't have the right team around them to help them execute on those things, right? So that's when I started Everest Talent Management with my two partners in 2019 to basically help other athletes, fulfill similar, similar goals that Pau had, right? Like, how can I use my platform to do things beyond sport? And why I do what I do, I guess the why is I just love the passion that the athletes I work with have for the things that they care about, and the fact that I can help them take advantage in a positive way of what they've accomplished on the field to achieve incredible things off the field. That's what motivates me, right? So if you have an athlete that wants to have impact in their community, that wants to, get involved with business or achieve social impact, the fact that we can help them shine, not just on the pitch, but away from the pitch, that's really fulfilling.
That's great, actually. To hear that all of the athletes that you work with, have that passion for not only the game but for life beyond the game, no?
Exactly.
And actually, that ties to my next question, which is, what is Everest Talent Management? Can you explain that as well briefly?
Yeah, essentially, it's kind of what I said, right? So we realize that there's this gap in the service offerings for these athletes, where for the athletes that are thinking about their off-field potential, there's no real kind of professionalized management that can help them, right? Like, so we basically become their C-suite, their CEO, CFO, COO, whatever you want to call it, and help them achieve their business and social impact goals, just by teaming up with them, by being their partners and joining forces with them. So it's a response to a realization that the three partners had, separately, right? Because one of my partners comes from CAA, from the big agency. He was running a team called Global Client Strategy. He was basically working with some of the biggest names represented by CAA, helping them build their businesses. Another partner comes from the law world. He represented, some of the biggest names in Hollywood and in sports and entertainment. And we all had realized independently that, there's this amazing, very established set of professionals around athletes, attorneys, agents, tax, accountants, tax attorneys and stuff like that. But the manager role traditionally tends to be played by like a family member or a friend, right? Somebody who's very trusted by the athlete, but for the most part, they don't have a business background to be able to help execute some of the things the athlete wants to execute, right? Or react to the opportunities that are coming inbound to the athlete. So that's why we started this company, because we see this potential. We have been in the industry. We kind of know what the potential is, and we can collectively bring, private equity investment banking expertise, legal expertise, and management expertise, and put those three things together at the service of the clients that we have. So we're essentially a management firm for athletes that want to achieve great things off the field.
Okay, well, thanks for that. The reason why you and I got connected is, the idea for this interview was, you participated in a session during World Football Summit Europe, and there was a report that came out of that looking into investment and ownership trends in not only in football, but in the sports industry. No? Why do you think such a report was necessary?
Well, I think both the session and the report, right? So to me, the session was interesting because it brought people from within the sports world, but with different backgrounds, right? So you had team owners, you had, attorneys that work with athletes and team owners, you had managers, you had advisors, you had former athletes. Like it was interesting to see kind of the different perspective, and people come from different places of the world. Like some people came from the US, some people came from Africa, some people came from Europe. And I think the report is important because it just kind of brings transparency to kind of what the industry is thinking, right? And it kind of showcases the trends that we're seeing, right? And when you get different people from different backgrounds in a room, and you're able to publicly share the answers to those questions, it kind of shows the world that, maybe the industry is moving in a direction that they didn't realize it was moving, right? So it's also good for people like me, because I come in with my perspective to see what everybody else in the room is thinking.
Well, that was kind of like the goal of the workshop, no? Have diversity. At the end of the day, diversity drives wisdom. No, I heard it the other day, and I think that's a quote I'm going to live by from now on.
Exactly.
So yeah, and one of the models that was described in the report, and this is where obviously you come in, is everything related to, as you said, athletes investing in the industry. No, how have you seen the space evolve over the last few years? Yeah.
So I think it's a very important thing, a very important part of what we do. We're not wealth managers, so that's I want to lead with that, right? So we're not gonna take the net worth of an athlete and say, let me invest all of this for you. But we separate the what we call purely financial investments, which are managed by professional wealth management firms investing in private equity, venture capital, different asset classes in a way that the athlete doesn't know where he's invested or she's invested in, and his or her name are not attached to any specific investments, right? But then there's the strategic investments where the athlete being involved actually adds value to the company because of the brand, because of the expertise they can bring to the table, and so on and so forth. And I think more and more athletes realize that especially if they're making good money with their contracts right now, the average salary of an NBA player right now is about $10 million, the average, right? Like you have people making like 40, 50, but the average is 10 million. Yeah. So if you're making $10 million a year, and you get an endorsement deal for like 300,000, 400,000, or maybe $1 million, taking part of that in equity, for example, becoming a partner of the company, that's interesting, right? Or just investing directly in startups that are aligned with your passion, right? So if you say, Pau, for example, cares about health and wellness, right? So the fact that you can say, look, I care about health and wellness. I have a foundation that talks about health and wellness for kids. I'm going to align part of my net worth to invest in companies like this that I believe can make a difference in this space. It's great storytelling. You're building your brand off the field. It's potentially very lucrative, right? Because it's not just cash. You're getting equity into a company, and because of the access and that they have because of their brand, they're getting into deals that traditional investors with less well-known brands will not be able to get into, right? So I see more and more athletes thinking about kind of what they care about when they're not competing, and how they can leverage their platform and their brand to get into deals like this. And it's very energizing to see more athletes thinking about the future in that way. And I think team ownership is a part of that. I think when you have been, as an athlete, when you have been competing for so long and generating a big part of the value, right? Like if an NBA team has grown in value from 500 million to like 3 billion in the last few years, a big part of it is the product on the court, right? The athletes, right? So the athletes wanting to get a piece of the equity that they're helping build, I think makes a ton of sense. And I think more and more athletes are thinking the ultimate goal is to become either a part owner or a majority owner in some cases. And you have examples like Michael Jordan, who owns the Charlotte Hornets, and more athletes will follow. Now, LeBron seems to be in the running to, if there's an expansion team in Vegas, which I don't know, I don't have any information, he wants to be an owner of that team, right? So you see that more and more, which I think it's great news.
What is interesting is what you mentioned, no? That this is not only done for pure or direct financial reasons. Athletes are also using this as a platform to build a personal brand, which effectively that's going to bring in returns in other fields, right?
One of the things that we tell our athletes is when you have a very clear positioning, very clear brand, it helps you say no quickly to things that don't fit. And it also helps attract things that really fit, right? So the more you do, the more you talk about, what you care about, the more you do around the things that you care about. So the more the positioning is self-reinforcing, and you do more deals, make more investments, say no to things that don't fit, say yes to things that fit, and start building that, then you're going to be getting more inbound of the things that you care about. You're going to be able to say no and get less inbound of the things that you don't care about, because you're always going to say no. And that creates this like self-fulfilling cycle, I guess. And I think that's very positive. And a bunch of the athletes that we work with, if they stick to their strategy, they can see that in the deal flow that they get.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you about the different categories that you see common across athletes, but then I'm thinking it really depends on each athlete, the personal brand, their values, so there's no really common pattern. So, so thank you for that answer. But I was curious to know, because it seems there is a lot of difference between US athletes, where it seems they're a couple of steps ahead, and the European athletes, even though they are, let's say, little by little, starting to approach a smart investment strategy. Why do you think that is, though?
So I think there are a few reasons. So number one, I think the U.S. athletes have role models that have been doing this for some time, right? So Magic Johnson is the example that a lot of athletes, especially NBA players, look up to, right? Like he retired early and started basically realizing that, hey, I can be this connector between the inner cities and corporate America and build movie theaters, Starbucks, and things like that. So he was able to hone in what made him unique, create his brand around that, and start building in that direction. And he became a role model for a lot of athletes that came after him. LeBron James, Steph Curry, even Kobe, like all those guys, they looked up to somebody like Magic on the business side. Michael Jordan is obviously like a great business person. A lot of his net worth comes from his deal with Nike for the Jordan brand, right? So I'm not minimizing that at all. But it's not, Magic did it differently, and I think that Magic is sort of the example a bunch of athletes follow. There's also a culture of entrepreneurship in the U.S. that I don't believe exists anywhere else, right? I think Europe is getting better in terms of like promoting entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs, but in the U.S., like that has been in the culture for years, right? So if you're a player in the Golden State Warriors locker room, for example, players don't talk about what car they drive; they talk about what startups they invested in, right? So the pressure in the locker room is not to buy the most expensive car, is to get involved in the latest hot tech startup in the Bay Area. And there's also a general culture around sports, right? I feel like sports in the U.S., there's obviously competition, but it's entertainment. Nobody bats an eye if LeBron loses a game today and tomorrow he's posting about a business deal that he's done. But in Europe, I've had so many conversations with soccer players about, well, I cannot post the day before a game. I don't post the day of the game. If I lose, I cannot post the day after the game. So suddenly, like you have one day a week to post about anything that's not soccer, right? Otherwise, you have to post about how you're focused on the game tomorrow, how you're playing today, how you're mad about the fact that you lost yesterday, because fans would not accept anything else, right? And the minute you do something different, people will say, well, you're distracted, right? And that doesn't happen in the U.S. Like people understand that they can be basketball players, NFL players, but still have business interests, and things like that. And in most cases, actually applauded that they're doing these things off the field. In Europe, there's still a lot of pressure from the fans and the culture around sports that athletes should be athletes and just focus on the athletes. And I think that's changing. That's changing a little bit, but I think the U.S. is still ahead of the Europe in that.
Well, that's a great summary, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to remember these athletes are people, and they have interests and ambitions beyond their profession, as all of us do.
Exactly.
Guess, right?
And the best moment to take advantage of of who they are when they're playing and the access that they have when they're playing is when they're playing. Because the minute they retire, their fame goes down very quickly. So if you don't take advantage of the moment when the lights are shining on you, and you just say, like, I'll just wait until I retire. The problem is when you retire, the lift is much harder because now you're a former player. And you can say, like, anecdotally, you can see how fans react to an existing player on the street, or when they see a former player retired 2 years ago. Like, it's like, oh, let me go and get a picture with him, or, oh, look, he used to play for Real Madrid or Barcelona or something, and that's a difference of 2 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but that's what it is, right? So they have to take. Our advice is take advantage of it while you're playing, right? I understand, especially when you start your career, like, you may want to focus on making sure that you make it in the league and you make it as a professional, but very quickly think about, what do I care about? How can I start leveraging what I do on the field to build my set of interests outside of the field? So when I retire, all these things are in motion, which I think Pau did a really good job because he's retired, and the level of activity that we have right now with Pau is incredible because he took advantage of his access and he built his team while he was an active player.
Pau is definitely an example. We're going to talk a little bit about him later. And then I'm also thinking, I mean, you're totally right that it's not only the power of the brand is at the peak when they're, let's say, active players, but it's also the network, no? That they have, it seems they have more access to more opportunities while they're being active because of what you said. They're being more recognized, and it kind of like helps, drive more conversations, I guess, no? Specifically related to sports and teams and leagues, and I know you said that a lot of these athletes are investing based on their personal passions and hobbies and their personal brand, but one of the interesting dynamics that we're seeing is that athletes are getting more and more involved in clubs or in leagues. Recently, for example, Giannis Antetokounmpo, just invested in the Nashville franchise. No, do you think this is going to be happening more and more, where athletes are becoming involved in either clubs or maybe even different sports? So, for example, you have your Tom Brady and other American athletes going heavily into pickleball, for example. No?
I think so. I mean, I think they see in their own leagues the increasing value of the franchises, right? Because especially closed leagues like the NBA, the NFL, or the MLS, right? Because you have a limited amount of assets. If the league grows, basically that gets distributed by throughout the same amount of assets. So that's why you've seen this amazing growth in values of NBA teams. MLS has grown. I think LAFC just crossed the $1 billion valuation mark, NWSL and stuff like that. So I think if an athlete can get involved in an authentic way in a franchise, that makes sense to them, right? The challenge that we always see is if you get involved in a franchise. Like personally, I think it's great that Giannis invested in I think it's the Nashville MLS franchise. It's hard for me to see the connection, just because he's not from Nashville. I mean, I guess he's Greek, so he comes from a country that one of the biggest sports is soccer. But I see it makes more sense, for example, when I see a player invest in the MLS team from his hometown, right? Or get involved with the NBA team of his hometown, or maybe investing in a pickleball franchise in the state where they live in or where they play in, right? So I think there's things like that. But yeah, I think because they see what's happening in the leagues they compete in, if they have the ability to invest in a team, if they expect especially the league to continue to grow, that makes sense. The MLS is interesting because they're trying to attract more players. That are not like at the retirement age, which is traditionally when they come to the MLS. They're trying to grow. They have a new, TV deal with Apple TV. You have the World Cup in the U.S. in 2026. So soccer in the U.S. is growing, and these athletes are trying to capture the momentum while the prices are still low. Although the MLS franchise values are much higher than they were several years ago. And some people may say maybe a little overvalued, but we'll see. Time will tell.
Time will tell, no? Obviously. And one of the examples that you were mentioning before in terms of athletes getting, investing in the place where they are, it also gives them more connection to the community. And the example I think of there is Patrick Mahomes. He's he's invested heavily in Kansas City sports.
So that makes sense to me because he's the franchise player. He's probably the most famous person in Kansas City right now. So getting more entrenched, it's a signal to the community that I'm here to stay.
Exactly. And actually, Patrick Mahomes, through his wife, I think also invested also in the women's soccer team.
Exactly.
And it does seem like, do you think, or the perception that I have is that women's soccer is kind of like the next quote unquote gold rush. Do you see it the same way?
I do. I think I would say women's sports in general, right? So there's there's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, nobody watches female sports, but then people that could actually create a story around female sports and have the rights of female sports choose not to create the story, and then they complain that there's no audience for it, right? I see, for example, what happened in Formula One in the U.S. Like nobody cared about Formula One in the U.S. Then Netflix does Drive to Survive. They're in season 5 right now, and now you hear people who've never watched a Formula One race in their life talk about the tire selection that Max Verstappen did in the last race, right? Which is crazy to me, and I know people like that now seem to be experts of Formula One because they're glued to this and now they watch every single race. There've been studies, I think, where they took a female soccer game and they basically changed the image so you cannot tell. Basically, they changed the bodies of the female players for like stick figures, so you could just see the ball movement and how they score and stuff like that. But you don't get to see if they're men, women, or races. And they basically showed people different footage of men's games and female games, and they couldn't tell which one were better. Like the perception would be, well, female soccer is not as good as competitive as male soccer. But when you actually take away, when you can identify if they're men or women, fans couldn't tell which one was better. And in some cases, they said, "Oh, this is a better match than this one." And then when they show the images, like what you actually said, the female match is better than the men's match, right? So I think the product is really good. I think the players are really good. WNBA players are incredible. NWSL players are incredible. And I think as the stories are told and as it's more available too, because part of the issue is availability, right? Like it's easy enough to watch an NBA match. It's hard to know where to find a WNBA match and NWSL match, right? So if it's more available, if the stories are told, I think the audience will be there because the product is there. And I think sponsors will realize too that it makes sense for them to invest. So I see this as I think female sports have growing potential. There are a few key players in the ecosystem that need to bet on, and I think they're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Agree. And one of the things I'm also curious is why are athletes, and especially I see it in football players, why are they so interested in esports and getting involved in esports?
So I would say esports is the easiest opportunity to own and control a competitive team, right? The barriers to entry are extremely low. Like you can basically put in a couple $100,000, hire a couple, people, a few players, a few content creators, pick a brand, create a website, create a bunch of social media accounts, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and you start competing, right? And I think actually that's a problem for the industry because the barriers to entry are so low that a bunch of players are starting teams, and then when they realize that, hey, it's actually kind of hard to get sponsors, it's actually kind of hard to build an audience. If I try to get into leagues that are well organized, that have limited spots, it's actually hard to get into those leagues, right? So I see a bunch of players, because of this desire of owning a team, they get into it really without knowing exactly how to do it, and they lose a bunch of money, and they don't really accomplish much. So that, I think that's why they're getting that interested in it, and I think there's a good way of doing it, but it's challenging too when you have so many people starting teams, instead of figuring out how to join forces and create a much more robust team that can compete in the top competitions in a specific market. But I think that's the reason why it's easy enough to, it's a good way of owning a team and kind of being the owner, as opposed to the player. And there's similarities between, the way an esports team is managed or the way a team is managed. A team in other sports, I mean.
Okay, well, thank you, because that was a question that I've had on my mind for some time now. So thanks for that. Luckily, though, I think there are also players who not only look into their into financial returns, but through their platform, they want to invest in initiatives that create positive social impact. No, so I'm thinking about Juan Mata with Common Goal, or Marcus Rashford, and of course Pau Gasol, with whom you work with, is another great example of that. Do you see little by little these players, or all players, or in general players, becoming more conscious about the positive impact they can create, or is it just a selected few?
So I would say more and more they do. Look, I know Juan well. I actually work with him, and I like. There's a lot of similarities between Juan and Pau, because they've always been very conscious about how they can use their platform to impact others, right? And I think they've done it differently. Obviously, Juan started Common Goal to create this movement, right? Like, Juan has always wanted to impact others and inspire others, right? To do something he wants to do at first. He wants to kind of, pave the way a little bit for others, and others have followed. And I think Common Goal has over 120 members right now, like more than 100 for sure, maybe 160. But they continue to grow that movement and that community, because the whole point is, we want you to commit a percentage of your wealth. It's almost like a pledge, like the Given Pledge that Warren Buffett started with Bill Gates in the U.S. But this notion of like, hey, you've made this money playing. How do you want to have an impact in this world, right? Like, commit a small percentage of your income, and then we can help you figure out ways of doing it. Pau has found, initially through UNICEF and then through his own foundation, this notion of it started as, well, how can I give back? And UNICEF was a very easy platform you get involved. They teach you, they help you, they take you to different countries so you can see the reality that's so far away from what you live every day. And that experience over the years has kept them grounded, right? Because when you and I may have a bad day, it's a bad day because, you lost a client, or you didn't sign a client, or, whatever, something happened. You broke a glass at home, just whatever. A bad day for some of these people is a day you and I cannot even imagine. We've probably never had a day like that in our life, right? And they have multiple days like that probably in a row. So when you achieve that realization, and you realize that you actually can help make a change, not just with your money, but with your voice and in your access, it's incredibly fulfilling to be able to do something like that, right? So Pau, for example, through his foundation, they've been able to create a national plan against childhood obesity in Spain with the Spanish government, right? That's not something you do achieve overnight, right? It takes a lot of work by a lot of people to build relationships, to do studies, share those studies and to position yourself as I'm the best one that can do this. And when you get to the point where you're announcing that plan and you start executing that plan, that's incredibly fulfilling. For somebody like Juan to be able to create a movement where it's not just his money put into the causes that he cares about, but he's helping other people think that they can achieve social impact as well with their money and their brand, incredibly fulfilling. And more the leagues and the teams are helping educate these athletes with the impact they can have in the world. Like this soccer players have millions of followers. Like you can be the third guy on the bench at a team in first division in Spain, and you probably have over 1 million followers on social media, right? Like your voice matters. And if you can tell the kids that follow you things that they can live by or lessons that they can follow, they will listen to you sometimes more than they listen to their parents, right? And athletes more and more are aware of the power of what they say and the power of the example that they set. And they're taking advantage of it in a positive way, which I think is great to see.
To me, Pau is a best-in-class example of how he's approaching, maybe even building an amazing legacy based on all the initiatives he's involved in. Because the way I see it, I see 3 pillars there. So he has a purpose or social impact as one pillar. He's also very mindful, going back to what you said in terms of his personal brand. He's very mindful of the partnerships that he signs, and he's also very active. I don't know if, and I think this is a great example that any football player out there or anybody in the football industry can learn from. I don't know if you have any more details around the framework he uses to build his legacy as a person, as an athlete, and beyond sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's on his website. Essentially, we think about it in 3. In his case, right? And we work differently with different people. In the case of Pau, we think about it in 3 main verticals. On one hand is sort of institutional relationships around sport, right? So the IOC being the biggest one. We're doing stuff with them, with the NBA. We're doing stuff with FIBA. We're doing things in and around sports with clubs, leagues, institutions in a way that makes sense, where his voice and his impact can matter, right? So that's, to me, the institutional aspect of Pau. Then you have the social impact, which is mostly Gazelle Foundation and UNICEF, right? He has Gazelle Foundation, both in Europe and in the US, and you have UNICEF, where he has a global role called, he's a global champion for nutrition and zero childhood obesity. So very much aligned with the mission for the Gazelle Foundation around, nutrition and fighting childhood obesity across 4 pillars, which are physical activity, nutrition, mental health, and sleep or rest in general, right? Because those are the 4 main factors that affect health and can provoke childhood obesity. And then we have the kind of the business activity, mostly around strategic investments. And we basically look at it first, sports. So for example, his investment in Overtime, which is this basketball league, now more than that, like they're doing football, they just announced boxing, the WNBA. So the investments are purely sports. Then we have investments around health and wellness, which is, again, same 4 pillars, right? Physical activity, nutrition, mental health, and sleep. And then we have this different vertical, but it's very important to Pau, which is supporting Spanish entrepreneurs that have global ambitions, right? So we are getting involved behind companies that, even if they may not fit those verticals that we talked about, sports, health, and wellness, because they have the ability to be the leaders in the categories they play in, we want to support. So for example, Colvin, which is this online flower sales company, or Vivla, which is the second luxury home, I guess part, what's the name I'm looking for? Fractional ownership of second luxury homes, right? it's not health and wellness, doesn't have to do anything with sports, but it's a company that's playing in an arena where they can be the best player in Europe and maybe the world, right? So that's why we want to support them. So those are the three main components of PAO's portfolio of activities, and that's the framework that we use, right? Things that don't fit that framework, traditionally we say no. The framework can evolve as we grow, as we start, meeting new people and stuff like that. But right now, it's been pretty set for some time, and we're pretty adamant of keeping it like that because it helps us be organized and know where things fit. And if they don't fit, we say no, and we move on.
I'm curious, are there any other athletes that you think are good examples for other football players to follow, whether you work with them or not? And if you work with them, I understand there may be NDAs, so feel free to take that wherever you want.
No, I mean, I think so Juan Mata, for example, is one that I've admired for some time just because of, I mean, I think Common Goal is an amazing movement that he's been able to build. Mm-hmm. But when you meet somebody like him, he's thoughtful. He thinks about the things he wants to do. He's aware of his platform. He's extremely well respected by other soccer players, but also by team owners and team managers, and also like people from FIFA, for example, right? Pilicueta is also somebody that I work with, and somebody that I think has that same mindset. He's a very smart guy, very thoughtful, very methodical, who's thinking about his career, his future, and stuff like that. And so I think those are the people that when I see how they were before I work with them, just because of who they are and kind of what they already built and their mindset, I would recommend any soccer player that is trying to figure out their way to try to reach out to them and have a conversation with them, because I think the advice that they can get from them is incredible. Other soccer players that I don't work with, I mean, I think Marcus Rashford was able to use his platform really well. And also he was able to connect a current issue in the UK, kids being fed, with an issue he lived when he was a kid, right? So it was extremely authentic for him to talk about this. And I think the fact that he was able to be a very strong voice, a strong advocate for the kids at a moment where they needed it the most. And because his voice is so powerful, because of he's an athlete with millions of followers, the UK government changed the decision after Marcus said something, right? So, and I think he's been able to, with the help of his team, obviously, to capitalize, if you will, on that moment in time and turn it into a very powerful brand of the field for him. I would say, I mean, those are names that come to mind right now. I'm sure there are others. By the way, sometimes those things are correlated with success on the field. But sometimes some of the biggest names that we've heard on the field are not the role models I would actually have players follow. You may, I don't want to name any names, but there are some players that are incredible on the field. And when it comes to performance on the field, yes, by all means, learn from this person. But when it comes to what they're doing on the field, how they portray themselves when they're not competing, I would say run away as fast as you can from that brand. But the ones that we mentioned, I think they're doing a really good job and I think inspiring the next generation of athletes when they think about how they want to be remembered by fans and their kids and their grandkids.
Definitely agree. I mean, the names you mentioned were fantastic examples. And in fact, we partner with Common Goal at World Football Summit, and we've been involved with them in several initiatives. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, we actually met with Juan in Turkey because we're doing our football innovation forum in Turkey. And, we took the opportunity that he was there, and he's just a fantastic person.
Agreed.
So definitely I couldn't have thought of better examples myself, really. Ferran, we're going to move into the final segment of the conversation because I want to be respectful of your time. And before I ask you the following question, I want the audience to understand that this is not any type of investment advice. This is for informational purposes only. So guys, check with your, financial advisors or whoever. But where do you see the future of athlete investments? Is there any trend that we should look out for?
I think you're going to see more athletes becoming investors publicly. I mean, I think all athletes, when they make money, somebody's either themselves or through, third parties, they're investing their money somewhere. But I think more and more are going to do more of that public investment, strategic investment to create their brand. I think you're going to see them go into areas that they understand. Anything related to performance on the field, nutrition, recovery, sleep, things like that. Those are very natural areas for athletes to be involved in. More and more people are thinking about, how can I learn how to meditate? How can I learn how to eat better, exercise, track my sleep, all those things. So those are very natural avenues for athletes to be involved. I think there are other areas like, I think esports, you mentioned earlier, just because it's the point of entry, the barrier to entry is very low. You mentioned pickleball earlier. I think the barrier of entry is really low right now, which means you can buy a team for $1 million. I think the bet is, if there's really a professional angle to this and there's enough money and TV rights and sponsorships and stuff like that, and we create closed leagues and I invest $1 million now and it can grow to $5 million. It's a smaller version of like investing in an NBA team in a closed league. So I think anything around sports and the sports business, I think it's going to make sense. I think tech startups is also something that's exciting, and I think it can be dangerous as well, right? Because I think tech startups, there's so many different industries. Like if you're an athlete and you invest in, or any investor in reality, I think you need to invest in areas you understand to a certain extent, right? I mean, I'm not saying you need to, you don't have to just stick to sports, but if you invest in AI startups or in crypto startups and you don't understand how the underlying technology works and the risk and stuff like that, you're going to lose a lot of money. Look at what happened in the crypto world, NFTs and stuff like that. So I think athletes are going to be looking into some of those areas, especially where there's a lot of, there's a huge B2C component where you want to inspire a bunch of, retail consumers to buy into this. Athletes are going to be great advocates for some of those companies, but I would say it's very important for athletes to understand where they're getting, where they're investing in, and where their image is being attached to, because there's a bunch of NFT and crypto companies that got public endorsement from athletes and celebrities, and now those people are being sued because they were promoting a product that has made a lot of people lose a lot of money, right? So you have to always be careful with that.
That is very well to my next question, because you just gave certain pieces of advice to any athlete looking to, to approach their investment and not only their partnership strategy. Are there any other pieces of advice you would share with them? Yeah,
I mean, I think to me, the most important thing is try to figure out what makes you unique, right? Like what can you, how could I tell a story of who you are in a way that the only possible answer, if I describe who you are without saying your name, the only answer would be you, right? So if you can create that unique story that's authentic, and then execute on that, I think that's the best thing you can do, right? Because you can try to become a smaller version or a different version of somebody else, or you can become the best version of who you are and what makes you authentic. So what we always try to do with the athletes that we work with is first create that unique thing, that unique story. Like, hey, this is who you are, and nobody else can be you because this is you. And then once you have that story, then you try to figure out how do I execute on that story, in terms of brand partnerships, in terms of, positioning on social media interviews, in terms of direct investments, in terms of, philanthropy, potential business partnerships and stuff like that. And when you start building that if you have a very clear story that's authentic, and you start building on that, making sure that every single thing you say, every single thing you do is aligned with that story, and you're very adamant about saying no to things that don't fit, then that story reinforces itself. And then everybody will know who you are because you constantly tell them by what you say and what you do, who you are, which will, again, filter out things that don't fit and attract things that fit. One of those examples that I've used several times is Leo DiCaprio, for example. Not an athlete, but he's a Hollywood star. He started investing in climate tech companies or companies that are fighting climate change across different verticals. But he also started a foundation focused on this. He started producing movies to tell this story. He did a movie called Before the Flood. He did a movie, And We Go Green, about Formula E. I think he's doing something with Extreme E. He spoke in front of the UN General Assembly about climate change. Like the fact that you have global experts or scientists that know 1,000 times more than Leo DiCaprio about this, but they choose Leo DiCaprio to talk about this in front of the UN General Assembly, that tells you something, right? And I think the moment I realized he had really achieved that position as an expert in the space is when I read a headline that said, Leo DiCaprio invested in this company. That means that this company is now legitimate in this space. So that tells you that he was basically chasing that notoriety, and now he is the stamp of approval. If he invests in your company, that means that you are a really key player in the climate change ecosystem. And I think athletes need to find what their version of their story is and what is the area that they care about, and start building in that same way, taking advantage of their access, their reach, their connectivity, and being very focused on building that unique story, and they can achieve amazing things. But start early when the lights are shining on you, because that's when a lot of people still care. And then when you retire, if you build that story can carry you for a very, very long time.
I appreciate your answer, because not only was Leonardo DiCaprio's example great, but it also, congratulations to you guys as well, because you're doing a fantastic job with Pau and all the athletes that you work with. They're able to identify what makes them unique, and you guys are executing or helping them execute very, very well on that. So yeah, wanted to take the opportunity to let you know.
Thank you.
Ferran, this was a fantastic conversation. Just 2 questions left from my side. First, what is the value, because you were at World Football Summit, what is the value that in-person events bring to the table?
I think there's no replacement for an in-person interactions, right? I think things like Zoom and stuff like that are great because you can see people's faces and you don't have to travel. But there's nothing like breaking bread with somebody. There's nothing like sharing a table and like shaking hands, and like it is extremely important. So I think this convenings where you listen to different people talk about different things, but you also have the ability to connect with them in person, share a meal, share a coffee, share a beer, glass of wine, whatever it is. I think those are incredibly important. And no matter how good technology gets, even if we start all, working in the metaverse and being in virtual offices, I don't think there's ever going to be something that replaces in-person interactions.
I agree. You accelerate not only business deals but personal relationships when you get to meet,
which are incredibly important for the business deals, right? Because you need to do business with people that you trust and people that you like working with. So and it's very hard to achieve that just remotely.
Ferran, thank you so much. I had so much fun. I could go on for hours, but I think, that's not going to be the case because I want to be respectful of your time. Where can people find out more about you, Everest Talent Management, the work that you do?
So basically our website, everesttm.com. So basically Everest Talent Management. The website is everesttm.com. Or then on LinkedIn, Ferran Prieto, they can find me and connect with me. So it's always happy to talk to people.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Ferran. I hope to bring you in further down the line to have a round two.
Absolutely.
So far, this has been an amazing conversation, so I want to thank you for it. Okay.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And there you have him, Ferran Prieto from Everest Talent Management, in a conversation I hope you found as insightful and overall as fun as I did. What were the key takeaways for me? First, when you have a strong brand, you really get to understand what opportunities fit and which ones don't. Second, if we look at Pau Gasol's framework, institutions, social impact, he's a champion for nutrition and child obesity, and he has strategic investments. Those are the 4 elements that define his brand. Third, remember to ask yourself, what makes you unique? And this is applicable to anybody listening, not just athletes. What is that unique story that defines you? And then, once you have your story figured out, everything needs to be aligned to that story. You need to execute brand partnerships, positioning, interviews, investments, and philanthropy. And you need to be able to say no to opportunities that do not align with your story. Is there anything else that stood out for you? If so, please reach out across social media and let us know. Remember, you can subscribe and rate the podcast on the platform of your choice, and you can also share it with other friends of the industry. Nothing else from my side. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the World Football Summit podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time.